Hey guys, tonight we begin with the silence. Before the cities, before the highways, before the smokestacks and the sprawling grid of modern ambition, there was just the land. A vast, breathing continent wrapped in ancient forests and endless rivers, waiting in the quiet of the Western Hemisphere. To the European mind, it was a blank space on a map, a terrifying void filled with monsters, gold, and the unknown. But to the people who would eventually arrive on its shores, it wasn't a dream. It was a test of endurance, of sanity, and of the human ability to survive in a world that actively wanted to kill you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine you are standing on the deck of a wooden ship in the early 1600s. The air smells of salt, tar, and the unwashed bodies of 100 people who haven't seen a bath in 2 months. You are crossing the Atlantic, a gray, heaving expanse of water that feels less like an ocean and more like a graveyard. Below deck, it's dark, damp, and loud with the sound of coughing. Above, the sails snap in the wind, driving you toward a horizon that refuses to stay still. You aren't a conqueror. You aren't a hero. You are likely desperate, fleeing religious persecution, crushing debt, or simply the crushing boredom of a life with no future in England. And then, you see it, a thin line of green against the gray sky, land. But this isn't the tropical paradise of the Spanish Caribbean. This is something else. This is the wild, ragged edge of North America. When the early settlers arrived, they didn't find cities of gold. They found trees. Endless, suffocating walls of timber that stretched from the coastline to the end of the world. There were no roads, no inns, no welcome committees. Just the sound of wind in the pines and the realization that you are thousands of miles from help. Let's start with Roanoke, the ghost story of colonial history. In 1587, over 100 settlers vanished into the mist, leaving behind nothing but a cryptic carving on a post, Croatoan. It was a warning, though no one at the time wanted to hear it. It was the land saying, "You are not welcome here yet." But humanity is stubborn, and the English were particularly stubborn. Fast forward to 1607, Jamestown. If you think your first apartment was bad, imagine Jamestown. It was built in a swamp. Not near a swamp, in a swamp. The water was brackish, meaning it was salty enough to poison you slowly, but fresh enough to breed clouds of mosquitoes carrying malaria. The settlers were a mix of gentlemen who refused to work and laborers who didn't know how to farm. They spent their first months digging for gold that wasn't there instead of planting corn that they desperately needed. Winter arrived, and with it came the starving time. It sounds like a poetic name, but the reality was a horror show. They ate the horses, then they ate the dogs, then the rats, and finally they ate the leather of their own boots. There are whispers in the historical record of darker meals, of graves disturbed, but we don't need to dwell on that to understand the misery. You wake up in a drafty fort, shivering under a thin blanket, listening to the wind howl through the gaps in the palisade. Your stomach is a hollow pit. The man next to you didn't wake up this morning. You drag him out to the frozen ground, say a quick prayer, and go back to digging for roots. That was the birth of English America. Not glory, just the grim refusal to die. But survival breeds toughness. Those who didn't die learned. They learned from the Powhatan Confederacy, the indigenous nations who watched these pale, starving strangers with a mix of curiosity and wariness. They learned that tobacco, a leafy green plant that tasted like smoke and profit, grew well in the Virginia soil. Suddenly, the colony had a purpose. It wasn't about gold anymore. It was about smoke. Now, shift your gaze north. It's 1620. A different ship, the Mayflower, is bobbing in the freezing waters off the coast of Massachusetts. These aren't gold seekers. They are families. They are the Pilgrims, religious separatists who looked at the Church of England and said, "Not strict enough." They wanted a new Jerusalem. What they got was a rock and a winter so cold it could freeze your breath in your throat. They landed at Plymouth, unprepared and undersupplied. They lived aboard the ship that first winter, coughing in the damp dark, while disease swept through them like a scythe. Half of them died before the first spring flower bloomed. Imagine the silence of that ship, the creaking of the hull. The knowledge that the frozen shore waiting for you is filled with unknown dangers, yet you have nowhere else to go. But when spring came, they stepped off the boat. They met the Wampanoag people, specifically Tisquantum, known as Squanto, who taught them how to fertilize corn with fish, how to navigate the woods, and how to survive in a land that seemed determined to freeze them out. They built meeting houses, they built fences, they built a society centered around the Bible, hard work, and the absolute certainty that everyone else was having too much fun. Life in these early northern colonies was a grind. You woke up before the sun. You worked until your hands were raw. You prayed. You slept. Repeat. The houses were small, dark, and smoky. The chimney was the center of life. If the fire went out, you froze. If the fire got too big, your house burned down. It was a delicate balance. There was no privacy. Families slept in the same room, sometimes in the same bed, huddled together for warmth. You knew your neighbor's business because you could hear them snoring through the wall. And the laws? They were strict. In Puritan New England, you could be fined for kissing in public, sleeping in church, or wearing clothes that were too fancy for your social station. They had a person whose job was to walk around church with a long stick, tickling the noses of people who fell asleep during the 3-hour sermons. It sounds funny now. It wasn't funny then. It was social control in a world where community cohesion was the only thing keeping the wolves at bay. But something was happening in these scattered, struggling settlements. They were growing. They were digging in. In the South, the economy began to turn on the wheel of plantation agriculture. Vast fields of tobacco, indigo, and rice began to eat up the forests. And here, the story takes its darkest turn. To fuel this growth, the colonies turned to labor that they didn't have to pay. At first, it was indentured servants, poor Europeans who signed away years of their lives for a ticket across the ocean. They worked the fields, died of fevers, and if they survived their contracts, they were given a set of clothes, a bushel of corn, and told to go west. But soon, the ships arriving in the harbors weren't just carrying English religious dissidents. They were carrying people in chains from West Africa. The first enslaved Africans arrived in Virginia in 1619. It was a quiet arrival that would tear a wound in the soul of the nation that would never fully heal. The economy of the colonies began to build itself on the backs of stolen labor. It was a brutal, efficient system that allowed a few men to live like kings in the middle of a wilderness. By the early 1700s, the coastline was no longer a terrified outpost. It was a string of thriving, bickering, distinct colonies. You had the rigid religious north, where town meetings and fishing fleets ruled. You had the fertile, sprawling south, where grand manor houses rose above the heat and the humidity. And in the middle, places like Pennsylvania and New York, where Dutch, German, and Swedish accents mingled in the markets. Let's talk about those markets. Walk through a colonial city like Boston or Philadelphia in 1740. The streets are cobblestone, slippery with mud and horse manure. The air smells of wood smoke, curing meat, and the salt of the harbor. It's loud, iron wheels clattering on stone, sailors shouting in a dozen languages, the ring of the blacksmith's hammer. You see taverns on every corner because, let's be honest, in a world without water filtration, beer and cider were the safest things to drink. People drank all day. A tankard for breakfast, a pint for lunch. It was a society functioning on a low-level buzz of alcohol and ambition. But there was a tension growing too. These people, these colonists, they were changing. They weren't quite British anymore. They wore British clothes, drank British tea, and toasted the British king. But they lived in a world the king couldn't imagine. They lived on the edge of a vast, untamed continent. They had to be self-reliant in a way that people in London didn't. If a bridge broke in London, you petitioned the city. If a bridge broke in Georgia, you fixed it yourself or you learned to swim. This self-reliance bred a strange kind of arrogance, a feeling that they were building something new, something biblical. A city upon a hill, John Winthrop called it. They believed they were special, chosen. And when you believe you are chosen, you start to resent anyone who tells you what to do. The French were there too, to the north and west, trading furs and building forts. The Spanish were to the south. The indigenous nations were everywhere, fighting a slow, tragic retreat. As diseases, they had no immunity to decimated their populations, and the hunger for land pushed the settlers further inland. The map was being drawn in blood and ink. Conflict was constant. King Philip's War in the 1670s was an apocalyptic struggle in New England. Villages burned, families were wiped out. It was a brutal reminder that they were living on stolen land, and the original owners weren't giving it up without a fight. The fear of a raid was a constant shadow in the back of the colonial mind. You went to sleep with a musket by the bed. You watched the tree line when you worked the fields. Yet, despite the fear, despite the cold, despite the labor, the colonies prospered. The population exploded. People were having massive families. 10, 12 children were common, partly because you needed the labor, and partly because you assumed half wouldn't survive childhood. But more and more of them did. They grew up taller and healthier than their cousins back in England, fed on the abundant meat and corn of the New World. A new identity was forming. It wasn't American yet, not really. A Virginian didn't see much in common with a Massachusetts Puritan. They were different worlds. One was built on cash crops and hierarchy, the other on religion and community. But they shared something fundamental: distance. The Atlantic Ocean was a 3,000-mile moat separating them from the authority of the crown. For generations, London had practiced a policy called salutary neglect. Basically, they let the colonies do whatever they wanted as long as the money kept flowing. And the colonists loved it. They elected their own assemblies. They made their own laws. They taxed themselves. They got used to the idea that they were the masters of their own destiny. They were British subjects, yes, but they were free British subjects. They toasted the king, but they didn't listen to him. Imagine sitting in a tavern in Williamsburg. The candlelight flickers on the wood tables. You're wearing a linen shirt that's been darned 3 times. You're drinking cider that was pressed from apples in your own orchard. You're talking about the price of tobacco, the latest sermon, or the trouble with the French on the frontier. You feel a sense of ownership over this life. You built it. Your father cleared the trees. Your mother survived the fevers. This isn't England's land anymore. In your heart, it's yours. But empires don't like to be ignored forever. In London, men in powdered wigs were looking at maps and ledgers. They saw a resource. They saw a piggy bank. They saw a group of upstart farmers who needed to be reminded who was in charge. The era of neglect was coming to an end. The French and Indian War was on the horizon, a global conflict that would drag the colonies into the center of world politics. It would bring British redcoats to American shores in numbers never seen before. And when those soldiers arrived, with their sneering officers and their demands for quarters, the colonists would look at them and realize something shocking. We are not the same. The gap between the old world and the new had become a canyon. The birth of the colonies wasn't a fairy tale. It was a gritty, muddy, painful slog. It was built on courage, yes, but also on exploitation and rigid intolerance. It was a place where you could be put in the stocks for swearing, or die of a tooth infection at 25. But it was also a place where the old rules didn't quite apply, where a person could reinvent themselves if they were willing to work hard enough and ignore the dangers. The silence of the pre-colonial forest had been replaced by the sound of axes, church bells, and the hum of commerce. The blank space on the map had been filled in. But the story was just beginning. The colonies were teenagers now, strong, rebellious, and convinced they knew better than their parents. And like any teenager, they were about to get into a massive fight with the authority figures back home. The stage is set. The players are in position. The land has been cleared, the towns built, the identity forged in the fires of survival. Now, the bill's coming due, and no one wants to pay it. The year is 1763. The smoke has finally cleared from the battlefields of the French and Indian War. For 7 long, bloody years, the forests of North America echoed with the crack of muskets and the screams of men dying for empires that viewed them as lines on a ledger. But now, it is quiet. France has been defeated. The British flag flies over Canada, over Florida, over the Great Lakes. To the average colonist, sipping ale in a Philadelphia tavern or mending a fence in rural Massachusetts, this should be a moment of triumph. You are part of the greatest empire the world has ever seen. You are safe. You are British. But there is a problem. Victory isn't free. In fact, it is incredibly expensive. In London, the mood isn't celebratory, it's anxious. The war has doubled the national debt. The treasury is empty. The king, George III, looks at a map of North America and doesn't see a glorious expanse of liberty. He sees a massive, unruly property that needs to be secured, administered, and paid for. And he sees you, the colonist, living on the edge of this vast estate, benefiting from the protection of the Royal Navy and the British Army, and paying almost nothing for the privilege. The relationship is about to change. The era of salutary neglect, that golden age where the parent let the teenager run wild, is over. The parent has come home, checked the bank account, and is now demanding rent. The first shock comes not with a tax, but with a line. The Proclamation of 1763. Imagine you are a farmer in Western Virginia. You've spent years eyeing the fertile lands over the Appalachian Mountains. You fought in the war, maybe lost a brother or a leg, believing that victory meant that land would be yours to settle. But now, a piece of paper from London says, "Stop. You cannot cross the mountains. That land is reserved for the Native Americans. To the British, this is a sensible, cost-saving measure to prevent another expensive war on the frontier. To you, it feels like a betrayal. You fought for that land. You bled for it. And now, a king thousands of miles away, who has never seen a hickory tree or skinned a deer, is telling you that you can't have it. It's the first crack in the mirror." Then, the money demands start. 1765. The Stamp Act. It sounds boring, doesn't it? Stamps. But this wasn't about postage. This was a tax on paper. Every legal document, every newspaper, every almanac, every deck of playing cards. If it was made of paper, it had to have a royal stamp, and that stamp cost money. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was the principle. It was visible. It was everywhere. Imagine walking into a lawyer's office to sign a deed for your farm. You see the stamp, you pay the extra shillings. It's a constant, nagging reminder that you are not in control. Imagine sitting in a tavern dealing a hand of cards. You see the stamp on the ace of spades. Even your leisure is owned by the crown. The reaction is visceral. It's electric. In Boston, a city that feels less like a town and more like a powder keg, the anger boils over. They don't just write letters. They build effigies of tax collectors, straw men dressed in coats, and hang them from the Liberty Tree. They tear down the houses of officials brick by brick, drinking the wine from their cellars as they smash the furniture. This is the birth of the mob, the Sons of Liberty. They aren't a polite debating society. They are rough, loud, and dangerous. They introduce a terrifying new form of protest, tar and feathering. It sounds almost cartoonish today, but the reality was torture. Hot pine tar, scalding enough to blister skin, poured over a naked body, followed by goose feathers. It was humiliation, pain, and a permanent scar, both physical and psychological. If you were a tax collector in 1765, you didn't sleep well. You listened to the sound of footsteps outside your door and wondered if tonight was the night the mob came for you. The British are baffled. They repealed the Stamp Act because it's costing more to enforce than it collects, but they passed the Declaratory Act right after. It essentially says, "We are repealing this tax, but we want you to know that we own you. We can tax you whenever we want, however we want." It's a power move, a flexing of imperial muscle. The tension simmers. It's a low-grade fever that won't break. 1767 brings the Townshend Acts, taxes on glass, lead, paint, paper, and tea. The colonists respond with boycotts. Women spin their own cloth instead of buying British wool. They make Liberty tea out of herbs and raspberry leaves. It's a quiet resistance, a domestic revolution taking place in kitchens and parlors. But in Boston, things are getting loud again. The British occupy the city in 1768. Imagine this. Boston is a small peninsula, a tight knot of winding streets and wharves. Suddenly, there are 4,000 redcoats living there. That's one soldier for every 4 citizens. They are everywhere. They stand on street corners. They drink in your taverns. They date local women. They take part-time jobs at the rope walks, undercutting the wages of local laborers. The atmosphere is claustrophobic. You can't walk down the street without being challenged by a sentry. You can't buy a pint without seeing a red uniform. It feels like an occupation. The air is thick with resentment. It's a friction that rubs raw, day after day, year after year. And then, the snap. March 5th, 1790. A cold, bitter night. It starts with a wig. A wigmaker's apprentice insults a British officer over an unpaid bill. A sentry strikes the boy. A crowd gathers. It's dark. The snow on the ground is frozen hard. The bells start ringing, usually a signal for fire, so more people pour into the streets, confused, agitated. They see the redcoats. They see the boys throwing snowballs, oyster shells, chunks of ice. "Lobster back," they scream. "Coward." The soldiers form a semicircle, muskets leveled. They are young men terrified, surrounded by a screaming mob in a dark city they don't understand. The crowd presses in. A club is thrown. A soldier is knocked down. And then a shot. Then another. And another. When the smoke clears, 5 men are dead or dying in the slush. The silence that follows the gunfire is heavier than the shouting. The snow is stained red. This isn't a protest anymore. It's a slaughter. Paul Revere, a silversmith with a genius for propaganda, engraves a print of the event. He calls it the Bloody Massacre. It shows a line of British soldiers firing in a coordinated volley into a peaceful crowd of gentlemen. It's not accurate. It was a chaotic brawl, not a firing squad, but accuracy doesn't matter. Emotion matters. The image travels up and down the coast. It convinces farmers in Georgia and merchants in New York that the British are not protectors. They are murderers. But strangely, after the massacre, things quiet down. The soldiers are pulled out of the city. The Townshend taxes are repealed, except for one, the tax on tea. It's kept as a symbol, a reminder of the king's right to tax. For 3 years, there's an uneasy calm. People drink smuggled tea from the Dutch. They go about their lives. The economy improves. It looks for a moment like the crisis is past. But revolutions don't die. They just wait for the right spark. 1. The Tea Act. The British government tries to bail out the East India Company, a massive corporation that is too big to fail. They granted a monopoly on tea sales in the colonies. The tea will actually be cheaper than the smuggled Dutch tea, even with the tax. The British think the colonists will be happy. Cheap tea. Who could complain? But they misread the room completely. It wasn't about the price. It was about the control. If Parliament can grant a monopoly on tea, they can grant a monopoly on anything. They can destroy any local business. They can enslave the economy. The ships arrive in Boston Harbor. The Dartmouth, the Eleanor, the Beaver. They are loaded with thousands of pounds of tea. The governor refuses to let them leave. The locals refuse to let them unload. It is a standoff. December 16th, 1773. A cold, damp night. Thousands gather at the Old South Meeting House. The meeting ends and a signal's given. A group of men, thinly disguised as Mohawk warriors, soot on their faces, blankets over their shoulders, march to the wharf. It is remarkably disciplined. This isn't a riot. They don't smash the ships. They don't steal the cargo. They don't hurt the crew. They ask for the keys to the hold. They haul the heavy chests onto the deck, smash them open with hatchets, and dump the contents into the dark, freezing water. Listen to the sound of that night, the crack of wood, the splash of the crates, the low murmur of the crowd watching from the shore, the smell of tea leaves mixing with the salt spray. It takes hours. They destroy 342 chests. That's 92,000 pounds of tea. In today's money, it's nearly $2 million worth of property destruction. They sweep the decks clean afterward. They are making a point. We are not vandals. We are defending our rights. But in London, they don't see rights. They see criminals. They see a colony that has lost its mind. King George is furious. The die is now cast, he writes. The colonies must either submit or triumph. The reaction is swift and brutal. 1774, the Coercive Acts. In America, they call them the Intolerable Acts. The British closed the port of Boston. Imagine that. The entire economy of the city shut down. No ships in, no ships out. It is an economic strangulation. They dissolve the local government. They allow British officials to be tried in England, far from colonial justice. They strengthen the Quartering Act, allowing soldiers to be housed in empty buildings. They intend to isolate Massachusetts. To make an example of it, they think the other colonies will look at Boston and say, "We better behave." Instead, the opposite happens. You are a planter in Virginia. You don't care much for Bostonians. You find them loud and overly religious. But you look at the blockade of Boston Harbor and you think, if they can do that to Boston, they can do that to Charleston. They can do that to New York. Food and supplies start pouring into Boston from across the continent. Rice from South Carolina, money from Pennsylvania, sheep from Connecticut. The British have accidentally done the one thing the colonists couldn't do for themselves. They have united them. September 1774, Philadelphia, the First Continental Congress. It's a gathering of strangers, men who have never met, who speak with different accents, who worship in different churches. George Washington is there, tall and silent in his uniform. John Adams, short and argumentative. Patrick Henry, a firebrand who declares, "I am not a Virginian, but an American." They aren't declaring independence yet. That's too radical. Most of them still consider themselves loyal subjects. They just want the rights of Englishmen. They want the clock turned back to 1763. They send a petition to the king. They agree to boycott British goods. They agree to meet again if things don't get better. But things don't get better. In Massachusetts, the royal government has effectively collapsed. The people are arming themselves. They are stockpiling gunpowder in barns and church cellars. They are drilling on the village greens. Farmers, blacksmiths, shopkeepers. They call themselves Minutemen, claiming they can be ready to fight in 60 seconds. It is a tense, paranoid winter. Spies are everywhere. General Gage, the British commander in Boston, knows the countryside is a tinderbox. He knows where the gunpowder is. He knows the leaders, Sam Adams and John Hancock, are hiding out in the villages. He decides to make a move, a quick surgical strike, march out to the town of Concord, seize the weapons, arrest the leaders, and be back in Boston by lunch. It's a standard police action, but you cannot police a revolution. April 18th, 75. Night falls. The British troops assemble quietly on the shores of the Charles River. They wrap their oars in cloth to muffle the sound. They wade through the marsh, wet boots sucking in the mud. But eyes are watching. Lanterns flicker in the steeple of the Old North Church. One if by land, two if by sea. Two lights. Riders are already thundering into the darkness. Paul Revere, William Dawes, Samuel Prescott. They are pounding on doors, shouting the alarm. The countryside wakes up. Church bells start ringing, not for prayer, but for war. Drums beat in the darkness. Imagine you are a 19-year-old farmer in Lexington. You hear the bell. You grab your musket, the one your father used to hunt turkeys. You kiss your mother goodbye, your hands shaking slightly. You walk to the village green. It's misty, it's cold. There are about 70 of you, neighbors, cousins. And then, through the morning fog, you hear them. The rhythmic tramp of boots, the clatter of equipment, hundreds of them. The British vanguard appears, their red coats bright against the green grass, their bayonets gleaming like a wall of silver needles. They are the professional army of the world's greatest superpower. You are a group of farmers standing on a lawn. Major Pitcairn, the British officer, rides forward. "Disperse, ye rebels," he shouts. "Damn you! Throw down your arms and disperse!" The militia commander, Captain Parker, looks at his men. He knows they can't win this fight. He orders them to go home, but to keep their muskets. They start to turn away. And then, a shot. Nobody knows who fired it. Maybe a nervous farmer tripping over a root. Maybe a British soldier startled by a noise. It doesn't matter. That crack of gunpowder is the sound of the world breaking in two. The British volley tears into the retreating men. Smoke fills the green. 8 Americans lie dead. The British march on to Concord, drums beating, convinced they have crushed the rebellion. But they haven't crushed it. They have ignited it. As the British search Concord for weapons that have already been moved, the sky fills with smoke from burning supplies. The farmers on the hills see the smoke. They think the soldiers are burning their homes. They come down from the ridges. They line the stone walls. They hide behind the trees. When the British turn to march back to Boston, they walk into a gauntlet. The road becomes a canyon of fire. It is 16 miles of continuous ambush. The most powerful army in the world is being picked apart by men they consider peasants. By the time the British stumble back into Boston that night, they are exhausted, bloodied, and humiliated. They look out from the city walls and see the campfires of the militia surrounding them. Thousands of fires, glowing in the dark like the eyes of a waking beast. The colonies are no longer a collection of bickering provinces. They are an army. The arguments over tea and stamps are over. The time for petitions is past. The road to revolution has ended at a bridge in Concord, and the war for a new nation has begun. The summer of 1775 is hot. The air in Philadelphia is thick with humidity and the buzz of flies, but the mood in the Continental Congress is heavier than the weather. They have done the unthinkable. They have authorized an army. They have appointed a commander. And now They are waiting for the inevitable hammer blow of the British Empire to shatter them into dust. To the outside observer, this revolution is a joke, a suicide pact. Great Britain is the superpower of the age. Its navy rules the oceans with oak and iron. Its army is a professional machine, drilled to perfection, funded by the deepest pockets in the world, the Americans. They have no navy. They have no money. Their army is a collection of farmers wearing homespun linen, carrying hunting rifles that might explode in their hands. They don't have shoes. They don't have gunpowder. Half the population doesn't even support the war. But wars aren't fought on paper. They are fought in the mud. June 17th, 1775, Bunker Hill. The British wake up to find the rebels have fortified the high ground overlooking Boston. The British commander, General Howe, doesn't flank them. He doesn't starve them out. He is insulted. He orders a frontal assault. He wants to teach these peasants a lesson in European warfare. Imagine standing behind that earthen wall. It's hot. You are thirsty. You can see them coming. Lines of red coats marching through the tall grass, bayonets glittering like a wave of steel. They are walking into your fire because they don't respect you. They think you will run. Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes. It's a famous line, but it wasn't about bravery. It was about poverty. You are low on ammunition. You can't afford to miss. When the order comes, the volley is devastating. The British line crumples. They retreat. They reform. They march up the hill again. You shoot them down again. But on the third charge, the clicking of your musket is the only sound. You are out of powder. The British pour over the walls. It is a chaotic, bloody retreat. The British take the hill, but at a cost of over 1,000 casualties. They have won the ground, but they have lost the illusion of invincibility. Enter George Washington. He arrives in Cambridge to take command. He is tall, imposing, always immaculate in his uniform. He looks like a statue of a hero, but inside, he is terrified. He looks at his army and sees a mob. They are dirty. They are drunk. They don't take orders. They go home when the harvest needs to be brought in. Washington has to build an army while fighting a war. It is like trying to build a boat while you are already drowning. 1. The Empire strikes back. A massive British fleet arrives in New York Harbor. Hundreds of ships, 30,000 troops. It is the largest expeditionary force Britain has ever sent anywhere. Washington tries to defend the city, but he is outmaneuvered and outgunned. The Battle of Long Island is a disaster. The Americans are routed. Washington escapes only by the grace of a miraculous fog that covers his retreat across the East River. If the wind had blown the other way, the revolution would have ended right there. What follows is the lowest point of the war. The Great Retreat. Washington is chased across New Jersey. His army is melting away. Desertions are rampant. The soldiers are leaving bloody footprints in the snow because their shoes have disintegrated. The British are offering pardons to anyone who swears loyalty to the king, and thousands are taking them. Thomas Paine sits by a campfire and writes, "These are the times that try men's souls." He isn't being poetic. He is watching the death of a dream. December 1776. The end is near. Enlistments are up on January 1st. Washington knows if he doesn't win a victory now, he won't have an army in a week. He looks at the map. Trenton, New Jersey. A garrison of Hessians, German mercenaries hired by the king, is wintering there. They are professional, terrifying soldiers. but they are celebrating Christmas. They are relaxed Christmas night. A blizzard is raging. The Delaware River is choked with jagged blocks of ice. Washington orders the crossing. It is a logistical nightmare. Men are shouting over the wind. Horses are slipping on the icy deck of the boats. They march 9 miles in the snow to Trenton. They attack at dawn. The Hessians are caught completely off guard. The battle lasts less than an hour. It is a total American victory. A week later, Washington wins again at Princeton. These aren't huge strategic triumphs. The British still hold New York, but psychologically, they are everything. The revolution has a pulse, but a pulse isn't enough. You need allies, and to get allies, you need to prove you can actually win a major battle. 1. The British formulate a plan to cut the rebellion in two. General John Burgoyne, Gentleman Johnny, marches an army south from Canada through the wilderness of upstate New York. He travels with wine, fine clothes, and mistresses. He treats the campaign like a hunting trip, but the American wilderness fights back. The trees are thick. The roads are non-existent. American militia swarm the woods like hornets. They fell trees across the path. They divert creeks to turn the roads into swamps. They pick off British officers with long rifles from the tree line. Burgoyne is bogging down. He is running out of food. October 1737, Saratoga. Burgoyne is surrounded. He has no choice. He surrenders his entire army. This is the turning point, not because of the land gained, but because of the message it sends across the ocean. In Paris, Benjamin Franklin has been charming the French court, wearing a fur hat and playing the role of the rustic philosopher. He has been begging for money, for ships, for troops. The French hate the British, but they don't back losers. Saratoga proves the Americans are not losers. France enters the war, then Spain, then the Netherlands. Suddenly, Britain isn't just fighting a colonial police action, they are fighting a world war. They have to defend their sugar islands in the Caribbean, their posts in India, their own coastline from invasion. The American colonies become a secondary theater. But try telling that to the soldiers at Valley Forge. Winter, 1777. While Franklin dines in Paris, Washington's army is starving in Pennsylvania. There is no food. There are no blankets. Disease, typhus, dysentery, smallpox stalks the cabins. Men are dying by the dozen every day. No meat, no soldier, they chant. But in this frozen hell, a transformation happens. A Prussian officer, Baron von Steuben, arrives. He doesn't speak English. He yells curses in French and German, but he knows how to drill. He takes these ragged, freezing farmers and teaches them how to march, how to reload in unison, how to use the bayonet. The army that marches out of Valley Forge in the spring is smaller, leaner, but it is finally a professional fighting force. The war shifts south. The British, frustrated in the north, decide to attack the soft underbelly of the colonies. They believe the South is full of loyalists who will rise up and support the king. They take Charleston. They smash the American army at Camden. It looks like the strategy is working. But the war in the South turns ugly. It becomes a civil war. Neighbor against neighbor. Brutal massacres of surrendering troops. The British cavalry commander, Banastre Tarleton, becomes known as the Butcher. But the British commander, Lord Cornwallis, makes a mistake. He chases the elusive American general Nathaniel Greene across the Carolinas. Greene loses every battle, but he wins the campaign. He bleeds the British dry. "We fight, get beat, rise, and fight again," Greene says. Cornwallis, exhausted and needing supplies, retreats to a sleepy tobacco port in Virginia called Yorktown. He sits with his back to the sea, waiting for the Royal Navy to pick him up. It is a sensible military move. He assumes Britain rules the waves, but for once the stars align for America. The French fleet arrives first, sealing off the Chesapeake Bay. The British Navy is driven off. Cornwallis is trapped. On land, Washington and the French General Rochambeau march south with lightning speed. They surround Yorktown. The siege begins. October 1781. The sky over Yorktown is streaked with the fire of mortars. The ground shakes with the constant bombardment. The British are running out of food. Their horses are dying. There is nowhere to go. October 19th, 1781. The guns fall silent. The British march out to surrender. They are impeccably dressed in new uniforms, but their flags are furled. The band reportedly plays a tune called "The World Turned Upside Down." Cornwallis is too humiliated to attend. He claims he is sick and sends his second-in-command. Washington refuses to take the sword from a subordinate. He points him to his own second-in-command. It is a moment of supreme dignity. The fighting is effectively over, but the war isn't. It takes 2 more years of negotiation. The British still hold New York, Charleston, and Savannah. The American army is unpaid and on the verge of mutiny. Washington has to use all his influence to keep his officers from marching on Congress and installing a military dictatorship. Finally, 1783, the Treaty of Paris. The terms are shocking. Britain doesn't just grant independence, they give the new United States all the land east of the Mississippi River. It is a massive, sprawling empire of wilderness. The British negotiators refuse to sit for the official portrait, leaving the painting half-finished, a visual representation of their embarrassment. But the victory is bittersweet. The cost has been enormous. 25,000 Americans are dead. The economy is in ruins. The currency is worthless. The cities are damaged. And the indigenous allies of the British, the Iroquois, the Cherokee, are abandoned by the treaty, left to face the wrath of the expanding American Republic alone. Washington says goodbye to his officers in a tavern in New York. He is weeping. He resigns his commission and rides home to Mount Vernon, determined to live the rest of his life as a farmer. The world watches in awe. A victorious general giving up power? It is unheard of. King George III, upon hearing that Washington intends to return to his farm, says, "If he does that, he will be the greatest man in the world. The war is won. The redcoats are gone. The last British ship sails out of New York Harbor, jeered by the crowds on the docks. But as the sails disappear over the horizon, a terrifying silence settles over the 13 states. They are free, but they are not a nation. They are a loose collection of squabbling republics held together by a piece of paper called the Articles of Confederation that isn't worth the ink it's written on. They have no president. They have no Supreme Court. They have no power to tax. They are bankrupt, divided, and fragile. The external enemy is gone, but the internal enemies, debt, division, and the conflicting visions of what this new country should be, are just waking up. The revolution destroyed the old order, but it hasn't built a new one. You are standing in a muddy field in 1783. The bonfires of celebration have burned down to ash. You look around at your neighbors. The man from Virginia doesn't trust the man from Massachusetts. The merchant doesn't trust the farmer. The slaveholder watches the free black soldier with suspicion. You have won the war. But can you survive the peace? The United States is a concept, a fragile experiment on the edge of a violent world, and it is about to face its first true test, the test of governing itself. The year is 1786. The war is over, the British are gone, and the United States of America is falling apart. To the outside world, the Treaty of Paris looked like a triumph, but in the ground, in the mud of rural Massachusetts or the swamps of Georgia, freedom feels a lot like chaos. The economy has collapsed. The continental dollar is worth less than the paper it is printed on. Citizens use it to wallpaper their outhouses. There is no central currency. If you travel from Pennsylvania to Maryland, you have to exchange your money like you are entering a foreign country. You are a farmer in western Massachusetts. His name is Daniel Shays. You fought at Bunker Hill. You served at Saratoga. You have a sword hanging over your fireplace that you used to defend this country's liberty. But now, that same country is trying to take your farm. The merchants in Boston demanded hard currency for debts, gold and silver that you don't have. And when you can't pay, the courts throw you in prison. You look at the court system and you see the same tyranny you fought against, just wearing a different coat. So, you do what Americans do. You grab your musket. Shays' Rebellion is the nightmare scenario the Founding Fathers feared. Thousands of angry armed veterans march on the courts. They shut them down. They threaten to burn Boston. The federal government, under the weak Articles of Confederation, can do absolutely nothing. They have no army to send. They have no money to pay one. Massachusetts has to hire a private mercenary army just to stop its own citizens from burning the state down. Washington watches from Mount Vernon, horrified. Are we to have the goodly fabric that 8 years were spent in raising pulled over our heads, he writes? The experiment is failing. The republic is dying in its cradle. It becomes clear survival requires a new set of rules. May 1787, Philadelphia. It is already hot. The air is heavy with humidity and the smell of the city's open sewers. 55 men gather in the Pennsylvania State House. They are the elite. Lawyers, planners, merchants. They lock the doors. They nail the windows shut to keep prying ears away and to keep the secrets inside. Imagine the temperature in that room. Men in wool coats, wigs, and linen shirts sweating through the Philadelphia summer, arguing over the fate of a continent. They aren't there to fix the Articles of Confederation. They are there to overthrow them. It is a peaceful coup. The room is dominated by giants. George Washington sits in the presiding chair, silent, imposing, the only man everyone trusts. James Madison is there, small, sickly, but possessing a mind like a steel trap, taking furious notes. Alexander Hamilton is there, talking for 6 hours straight about the need for a strong central government, even suggesting a president for life. Benjamin Franklin is there, 81 years old, carried in on a sedan chair, offering witty aphorisms to cool the tempers. The arguments are vicious. The small states fear the large states. The large states refuse to pay for the small ones. They fight over representation. They fight over power. And, inevitably, they fight over the dark shadow that lies across the entire table: slavery. The southern states make it clear. touch our peculiar institution, and we walk. The nation ends right here. So the compromises are made. The 3/5 compromise is written into the supreme law of the land, counting an enslaved human being as fraction of a person for the sake of political power. It is a stain that will eventually wash out only in blood, but in 1787, they call it necessary. September 17th, 1787. The document is signed. It isn't perfect. It is a patchwork of deals and concessions, but it creates something new, a federal government with teeth, a president, a Congress, a Supreme Court. As Franklin leaves the hall, a woman asks him, "Well, doctor, what have we got? A republic or a monarchy?" Franklin looks at her and says, "A republic, if you can keep it." But writing it is the easy part. Selling it is the war. The country splits into two camps, Federalists who want this strong new government and anti-Federalists who see it as a betrayal of the Revolution. Why trade a King George for a President George? The ratification debates are fierce. Newspapers scream treason. Riots break out in New York. But slowly, state by state, the Constitution is ratified. The promise of a Bill of Rights. 10 amendments guaranteeing freedom of speech, religion, and protection from the government swings the tide. 1. New York City, the first capital. George Washington stands on the balcony of Federal Hall. He's wearing a suit of American-made brown broadcloth. He places his hand on a Bible. He is trembling. He knows that every move he makes will set a precedent for centuries. How does a president walk? How does he speak? What does he want to be called? The Senate suggested, "His Highness the President of the United States and protector of the rights of the same." Washington sensibly opted for Mr. President. He builds a cabinet, a team of rivals. Thomas Jefferson as Secretary of State, Alexander Hamilton as Secretary of the Treasury. These two men hate each other with a passion that defines the era. Jefferson sees an agrarian utopia of independent farmers. Hamilton sees a modern industrial powerhouse of banks and factories. Their feud births the first political parties. Hamilton faces a crisis. The nation is bankrupt. The states are drowning in war debt. Hamilton proposes a radical idea. The federal government should assume all the state debts. He wants to tie the wealthy merchants to the success of the national government. To pay for it, he creates a national bank. Jefferson is apoplectic. "Where in the Constitution does it say you can make a bank?" he demands. Hamilton points to the necessary and proper clause. The argument threatens to tear the administration apart. They strike a deal over a dinner table. Hamilton gets his financial system, his bank, and his debt assumption. In exchange, the capital city will move south to a swampy patch of land on the Potomac River chosen by Washington. The future Washington, D.C. is born from a backroom deal. But laws on paper don't mean much in the backwoods. To pay the interest on the debt, Hamilton passes a tax on whiskey. For the farmers of western Pennsylvania, whiskey isn't just a drink, it's currency. It's how they preserve their grain. Taxing it feels like the Stamp Act all over again. They attack tax collectors. They tar and feather them. They burn barns. By 1794, 7,000 armed rebels are marching toward Pittsburgh. It is the Whiskey Rebellion. Washington doesn't write a letter. He puts on his old uniform. He mounts his horse. He leads 13,000 troops, an army larger than the one he commanded during the Revolution, into Pennsylvania. It is the only time a sitting U.S. president has led troops in the field. The rebellion evaporates. The rebels see the army and go home. Washington has made his point. The law is the law. If you don't like it, you vote. You don't shoot. But while the government flexes its muscles in the East, a bloody war is raging in the West. The Treaty of Paris gave the U.S. the land up to the Mississippi, but nobody told the indigenous nations living there. In the Ohio Valley, a powerful confederacy of tribes, Shawnee, Miami, Delaware, led by the brilliant strategist Little Turtle and the warrior Bluejacket, refuses to leave. They aren't just raiding, they are winning. 1. General Arthur St. Clair leads an American army into the Ohio wilderness to crush the Confederacy. He doesn't scout. He doesn't build defenses. At dawn, near the Wabash River, the indigenous forces strike. It is a massacre. The American army is obliterated. Over 900 casualties. It is, proportionally, the worst defeat in the history of the U.S. military. Worse than Pearl Harbor, worse than Little Bighorn. Washington, upon hearing the news, reportedly flies into a rage so violent that his guests are terrified. He sends Mad Anthony Wayne, a hard-edged revolutionary veteran, to fix it. Wayne trains a new army, the Legion of the United States. He drills them for 2 years. In 1794, at the Battle of Fallen Timbers, amidst a forest of tornado-toppled trees, Wayne's discipline breaks the Confederacy. The Treaty of Greenville follows. The tribes are forced to cede most of Ohio. It is the first major land grab of the new republic, a template for the century of displacement to come. 1. Washington is tired. He is old. The press is attacking him. He does something that stuns the world again. He walks away. He refuses a third term. In his farewell address, he warns the nation against 2 things: political parties and foreign alliances. The nation, naturally, ignores both warnings immediately. The election of 1796 is nasty. John Adams, the Federalist, barely beats Jefferson. Adams inherits a quasi-war with France, a former ally now in the throes of its own bloody revolution. French privateers are seizing American ships. The XYZ affair, where French diplomats demand bribes, outrages the public. Adams builds a navy. He prepares for war. But he also passes the Alien and Sedition Acts, laws that allow the government to deport foreigners and jail journalists who criticize the president. It is a moment of darkness. The land of the free is throwing newspaper editors in prison. The backlash is fierce. In the election of 1800, the gloves come off completely. Jefferson's camp calls Adams a hideous hermaphroditical character. Adams's camp claims that if Jefferson wins, murder, robbery, and incest will be openly taught and practiced. The election ends in a tie, not between Adams and Jefferson, but between Jefferson and his own running mate, Aaron Burr. The Constitution is flawed. It didn't account for running mates. The decision goes to the House of Representatives. They vote 35 times. Deadlock. It all comes down to Alexander Hamilton. He hates Jefferson. He thinks his agrarian vision is naive. But he despises Burr. He sees Burr as a man with no principles, a dangerous opportunist. Jefferson has beliefs, Hamilton says. Burr has none. Hamilton uses his influence. He swings the vote to Jefferson. It is his final great act of statesmanship, and it seals his fate. 3 years later, Burr will kill him in a duel on the cliffs of Weehawken. But in 1801, something miraculous happens. John Adams, the sitting president, the man with the army and the navy at his command, loses the election. And he packs his bags. He gets on a carriage and leaves Washington, D.C. quietly before dawn. It is the Revolution of 1800, the first peaceful transfer of power between opposing parties in modern history. In Europe, kings die or are beheaded to change governments. In America, they count ballots. Thomas Jefferson walks to the Capitol to be inaugurated. He wears simple clothes. He walks, he doesn't ride. He wants to strip away the pomp of the Federalists. "We are all Republicans. We are all Federalists," he says. He cuts the budget. He shrinks the Navy. He wants a small, quiet government, but history doesn't allow for quiet. Across the ocean, Napoleon Bonaparte has risen. He has conquered Europe, and now he is looking at North America. He forces Spain to give back the vast Louisiana territory. Suddenly, the mouth of the Mississippi River, the economic jugular of the American West, is in the hands of the most aggressive military genius on earth. Jefferson sends diplomats to Paris with a checkbook. "Buy New Orleans," he tells them. "Offer 10 million. But Napoleon has problems of his own. His army in Haiti has been destroyed by a slave revolution and yellow fever. He needs money for war with England." He looks at the map of North America and shrugs. "I renounce it," Napoleon says. "They only ask of me one town in Louisiana, but I already consider the colony as entirely lost." He offers the Americans a deal that makes their heads spin. Not just New Orleans, all of it, the whole territory, 828,000 square miles, from the Mississippi to the Rockies, for $15 million, 4 cents an acre. It is the Louisiana Purchase. With the stroke of a pen, the United States doubles in size. It is no longer a coastal republic. It is a continental empire. Jefferson, the strict constitutionalist, knows he doesn't have the legal authority to buy this land. But he does it anyway. The temptation is too great. The destiny is too manifest. But as the map expands, the cracks in the foundation widen. New land means new states. And new states mean a new question, one that has been whispering in the background since Philadelphia. Will these new lands be free, or will they be slave? The nation has been built. The machinery of government is running. The borders are pushing west into the endless grass of the prairies. But the original sin of the Republic is moving west with the wagons. The compromises of 1787 are about to be tested by the geography of 1803. The era of founding is over. The era of fracture is about to begin. The nation is growing faster than its wisdom can handle, and the road ahead leads straight into the fire. The year is 1830. If you stand on a hill in Massachusetts, the air no longer smells just of pine sap and sea salt. It smells of coal smoke. It smells of iron heated to the breaking point. The silence of the agrarian republic that Jefferson dreamed of is gone, replaced by a new rhythmic mechanical heartbeat. Clank, hiss, thud. The Industrial Revolution has arrived in America, and it is hungry. In Lowell, Massachusetts, huge brick factories rise along the Merrimack River. Inside, the noise is deafening. Thousands of power looms rattle and shake the floorboards. The air is thick with cotton dust, a white haze that coats the lungs of the mill girls, young women who have left their family farms for the first time to earn a wage. They work 14 hours a day, ruled by the bell, their lives measured not by the sun, but by the clock. This is the new North. It is a machine. Canals like the Erie Canal are slicing through the earth, connecting the Atlantic Ocean to the Great Lakes, turning New York City into the financial capital of the world. The steam engine is conquering the rivers. The railroad is beginning to stitch the continent together with iron thread. Speed is the new currency. But look south. The world is different. It is quieter, hotter, and darker. In 1793, a young tutor named Eli Whitney invented a simple box with a crank called the cotton gin. He thought it would reduce the need for labor. Instead, it made short staple cotton the most profitable crop in human history. Suddenly, the Deep South isn't just a farming region, it is the Cotton Kingdom, and a kingdom needs subjects. The demand for enslaved labor explodes. The domestic slave trade becomes a massive, tragic industry, tearing families apart in Virginia and marching them in chains to the brutal cotton fields of Mississippi and Alabama. The South becomes a society frozen in time, a feudal system built on the absolute power of the white planter and the absolute subjugation of the black enslaved person. By the 1850s, the United States is not one country. It is two civilizations sharing a map. The North is modern, industrial, urbanizing, and increasingly immigrant-heavy. The South is agrarian, aristocratic, and dependent on slavery. They speak the same language, but they mean different things when they say the word liberty. The friction is constant. Every time a wagon train heads west, the question follows it like a shadow. Will this new land be slave, or will it be free? They try to compromise. The Missouri Compromise. The Compromise of 1850. But you cannot compromise on a moral singularity. The pressure builds. In Kansas, it turns into a shooting war. Bleeding Kansas, neighbors murdering neighbors over the expansion of slavery. In the Senate, a Southern representative beats a Northern senator unconscious with a cane. The veneer of civilization is cracking. Then, 1860, the election of Abraham Lincoln. To the South, Lincoln isn't just a politician. He is an existential threat. He represents a North that no longer needs the South, a North that has the population and the industry to dictate the future. South Carolina secedes, then Mississippi, then Florida. One by one, the stars fall off the flag. Lincoln watches from Springfield. He takes the train to Washington, dodging assassination plots. He stands on the steps of the incomplete Capitol building. The dome is just a steel skeleton, and pleads for peace. We are not enemies, but friends, he says. We must not be enemies. But the South isn't listening. April 12, 1861. Fort Sumter, a federal garrison in Charleston Harbor. The Confederate cannons open fire. The war is on. At first, it is a carnival. Bands playing, flags waving, young men in the North and South rush to enlist, terrified the war will be over before they get a chance to fight. They pack picnic baskets. They think it will be a glorious adventure. July 1861, Bull Run. The armies meet just outside Washington. It is a hot, dusty day. Civilians ride out in carriages to watch the battle like it's a sporting event. But war isn't a sport. It is a slaughter. The inexperienced armies collide in a confused, bloody mess. The air fills with the screams of wounded horses and men. The Union line breaks. The retreat turns into a panic. The picnic baskets are trampled in the mud. The reality of industrial warfare sets in. This won't be a short war. It will be a grinder. The years that follow are a blur of names that will be etched into granite forever. Shiloh, Antietam, Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville. Technology has outpaced tactics. The soldiers are using rifled muskets that can kill accurately at 400 yards, but the generals are still ordering them to march in tight formation like it's 1776. The result is carnage on a scale the world has never seen. September 17, 1862, Antietam, Maryland. It is the single bloodiest day in American history. 23,000 casualties in 12 hours. The fighting in the cornfield is so intense that the corn is cut down by bullets as if by a scythe. The sunken road becomes a lane of death, filled with bodies 3 deep. Lincoln uses the victory. It was really a draw. But the Confederates retreated to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. It is a strategic masterstroke. It changes the purpose of the war. It is no longer just about preserving a map. It is about human freedom. It keeps Britain and France from intervening on the side of the South. And it opens the door for 200,000 black soldiers to join the Union Army, fighting for their own liberation. Summer 1863, the turning point. In the West, Ulysses S. Grant, a cigar-chomping general who had failed at almost everything in civilian life, is besieging Vicksburg. He is strangling the city, starving it into submission to take control of the Mississippi River. In the east, Robert E. Lee, the brilliant Confederate commander, invades the North. He's looking for a knockout blow. He stumbles into the Union Army at a small crossroads town in Pennsylvania. Gettysburg. For 3 days, the hills shake. July 3rd. Lee orders a massive frontal assault. Pickett's charge. 12,000 Confederate soldiers step out of the tree line. They march across a mile of open field toward the Union Center on Cemetery Ridge. It is a magnificent, suicidal spectacle. The Union artillery tears holes in the line. The canister shot turns men into mist. They keep coming. They reach the stone wall, hand-to-hand combat. And then the wave breaks. They retreat. Lee rides out to meet them, whispering, "It is all my fault." The same day, Vicksburg falls. The South is cut in two. The end is visible, but it is still 2 years of blood away. The nature of the war changes. It becomes total war. Grant comes east to face Lee. He doesn't retreat. He latches onto Lee's army like a bulldog. The wilderness, Spotsylvania, Cold Harbor. He loses thousands of men, but he can replace them. Lee can't. It is the math of attrition. Meanwhile, William Tecumseh Sherman marches through Georgia. He isn't fighting an army, he is fighting a society. War is hell, he says, and he intends to make the South understand that. He burns Atlanta. He marches to the sea, twisting railroad ties around trees, Sherman's neckties, burning crops, destroying the South's ability to wage war. April 1865. The Confederacy is a hollow shell. Its money is worthless. Its soldiers are starving. Its capital, Richmond, is burning, set ablaze by retreating troops. April 9th, 1865. Appomattox Courthouse, a quiet Sunday morning. Lee waits in the parlor of a brick house. He wears his finest uniform, a sword at his side. Grant arrives. He's wearing a mud-spattered private's coat with general stars sewn on the shoulder. He looks like a man who has been sleeping in a saddle for 4 years. They talk about old times in the Mexican War. Then Lee asks for the terms. Grant is generous. He doesn't want vengeance. He allows the Confederate officers to keep their side arms. He lets the men keep their horses so they can plant the spring crops. "Let us have peace," Grant writes. As Lee rides away, the Union soldiers start to cheer. Grant orders them to stop. "The rebels are our countrymen again," he says. "The war is over. 20,000 Americans are dead. That is 2% of the population. If that happened today, it would be 6 million dead. 5 days later, the joy turns to horror. Abraham Lincoln, the man who held the Union together through sheer will and melancholy humor, sits in a box at Ford's Theater. A shot rings out. The president is dead. The North is plunged into grief. The South is plunged into uncertainty. The architect of the peace is gone. Now comes Reconstruction. It is perhaps the most misunderstood and tragic era in American history. The South is in ruins. The economy is destroyed. And 4 million people who were property on Tuesday are citizens on Wednesday. What do you do? How do you rebuild a society from the ground up? For a brief shining moment, it looks like real change is possible. The 13th Amendment abolishes slavery. The 14th Amendment guarantees citizenship. The 15th Amendment grants the right to vote. The South is occupied by the Union Army. Black men are elected to Congress. Schools are built for formerly enslaved children who are hungry for the alphabet. But the backlash is ferocious. The defeated white South cannot accept this new world. They form secret societies. The Ku Klux Klan rides at night, burning crosses, lynching black leaders, using terror to restore the old racial hierarchy. The North, exhausted by the war and distracted by its own booming industrial economy, eventually loses interest. The political will fades. 1. A backroom deal settles a disputed presidential election. The Republicans get the White House for Rutherford B. Hayes. In exchange, they agree to pull the last federal troops out of the South. Reconstruction is over. The lights go out in the South. The Jim Crow era begins. Laws are passed to segregate, to disenfranchise, to push black Americans back into a state of near slavery called sharecropping. The promise of the revolution, that all men are created equal, is deferred for another century. But while the South sinks into stagnation, the North explodes. The war has been a catalyst. To fight the war, the North had to build factories, lay railroads, standardize clothing sizes, mass-produce canned food. The government has become a massive purchaser of goods. The economy that emerges from the Civil War is a titan. The Transcontinental Railroad is completed in 1869, driving a golden spike into the Utah desert, linking the Atlantic to the Pacific with a ribbon of steel. You can now cross the continent in a week, a journey that used to take 6 months. The West is open. The cattle drives begin, moving millions of longhorns from Texas to the railheads in Kansas. The cowboy becomes the new American icon. The Plains Wars rage on as the indigenous nations, the Sioux, the Cheyenne, the Apache, fight their final desperate battles against the encroaching tide of miners and settlers. In the cities, a new breed of men is rising. They aren't politicians or generals. They are businessmen. Cornelius Vanderbilt, Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller. They look at the chaotic, competitive market and see inefficiency. They want order. They want monopoly. Carnegie builds steel mills in Pittsburgh that glow red day and night, producing the metal skeletons for the skyscrapers that will soon pierce the clouds. Rockefeller ruthlessly consolidates the oil industry, refining the kerosene that lights the world's lamps. They are called robber barons by some, captains of industry by others. They amass fortunes that make European kings look like paupers. They buy senators. They crush unions. They build libraries and universities. The United States has survived its suicide attempt. It has purged the sin of slavery from its constitution, though not from its heart. It has bound the continent together with iron rails. It is no longer a collection of colonies. It is a singular nation. Before the war, people said, "The United States are." After the war, they say, "The United States is." It is a single, terrifyingly powerful entity. It has the resources, the population, and the industrial base to challenge any power on Earth. But for now, it is looking inward, digesting a continent, healing its wounds, and building the engines that will drive the 20th century. The wooden ships and muskets of the Revolution are gone. The age of steel, steam, and oil has begun. The American giant is awake, and it is hungry for more than just land. It is beginning to look across the oceans. The year is 1898. The American frontier is closed. The bison are gone, replaced by cattle. The indigenous nations have been confined to reservations. The continent has been conquered, stitched together by rail and telegraph wire. The United States is now a colossus of steel and steam, producing more coal, iron, and wheat than any other nation on Earth. It is rich, it is loud, and it is bored. For a century, the American gaze has been fixed westward, staring at the setting sun. But now, having reached the Pacific surf, the giant turns its head. It looks across the oceans. It sees a world dominated by old empires, Britain, France, Spain, carving up Africa and Asia like a holiday turkey. And America, brimming with nervous energy and factory-made goods it needs to sell, begins to wonder. Why not us? The spark comes in the Caribbean. Cuba is burning. The locals are rebelling against their Spanish masters. In the United States, newspapers owned by men like William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer smell blood. They print lurid stories of Spanish cruelty. They whip the public into a frenzy. "You furnish the pictures," Hearst supposedly tells an artist, "and I'll furnish the war." February 15th, 1898, Havana Harbor. The night is humid and still. The USS Maine, a gleaming white battleship sent to protect American interests, sits at anchor. Sailors are sleeping in their hammocks. Officers are writing letters home. At 9:40 p.m., the silence is shattered. An explosion rips the ship apart. 5 tons of powder ignite. The bow is blown into the sky. 260 American sailors are dead before the smoke clears. Was it a Spanish mine, a coal bunker fire, an accident? It doesn't matter. The truth is irrelevant. The mood is war. Remember the Maine, "To hell with Spain," becomes the chant. The war that follows is short, sharp, and decisive. Secretary of State John Hay calls it a splendid little war. It lasts only a few months. The aging Spanish fleet, made of wood and pride, is obliterated by modern American steel cruisers in Manila Bay and Santiago. Theodore Roosevelt, a bespectacled aristocrat with the energy of a caffeinated bull moose, charges up San Juan Hill in Cuba, creating a legend that will carry him to the White House. When the smoke clears, the United States is no longer just a republic. It is an empire. It possesses Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. Suddenly, the American flag flies over tropical jungles, thousands of miles from home. But empire is messy. In the Philippines, the people who thought the Americans were liberators realize they have just traded one master for another. They rebel. The United States finds itself fighting a brutal counterinsurgency in the jungle. It involves torture, waterboarding, and burning villages. It is a dark, ugly war that the newspapers back home don't like to talk about. It is the first taste of the burden of being a global policeman. Enter the 20th century. Enter Theodore Roosevelt. He becomes president in 1901 after McKinley is assassinated. He is the personification of this new American century. He believes the United States should speak softly and carry a big stick. He wants a navy that can sail anywhere, and to do that, he needs a shortcut. He looks at a narrow strip of jungle in Panama. The French had tried to dig a canal there and failed, beaten by yellow fever and engineering incompetence. Roosevelt doesn't care. He supports a revolution in Panama, detaches it from Colombia, and starts digging. It is the greatest engineering project in human history. Imagine the heat. 120 degrees in the cut. The air is thick with mosquitoes carrying malaria. The mudslides are constant, burying steam shovels and men alive. But the Americans bring their industrial might to bear. They spray oil on the swamps to kill the larvae. They use dynamite on a scale never seen before. They move mountains. In 1914, the canal opens. The Atlantic and Pacific are joined. The world has shrunk, and the United States holds the keys to the gate. But just as the canal opens, the old world decides to commit suicide. August 1914. Europe explodes. A web of alliances drags the great powers into the meat grinder of World War I. France and Britain against Germany and Austria-Hungary. At first, America watches from across the ocean with horror and smugness. Thanks for the Atlantic Ocean, they say. President Woodrow Wilson urges neutrality. He wins re-election in 1916 on the slogan, "He kept us out of war." The United States gets rich. It sells food, ammunition, and steel to the Allies. It lends them billions of dollars. New York City officially replaces London as the financial center of the world. The debtor nation has become the creditor, but you cannot stay neutral when the world is burning. German U-boats hunting in wolf packs begin sinking merchant ships. In 1915, they sink the Lusitania, a passenger liner. 200 people die, including 128 Americans. The anger builds. Then, the Zimmerman telegram. Germany tries to bribe Mexico into attacking the U.S., promising them Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. It is a clumsy, desperate move, and it backfires spectacularly. April 1917. Wilson asks Congress for war. The world must be made safe for democracy, he says. The United States is not ready. It has a tiny army. But it has something else, infinite capacity. It institutes a draft. It converts car factories to make machine guns. It sends 2 million men, the doughboys, to France. Imagine you are a farm boy from Kansas. You have never seen the ocean. You are put on a transport ship, terrified of submarines. You land in France. It rains constantly. You are marched to the front. You have never seen anything like the Western Front. It is a moonscape of mud, barbed wire, and shell craters filled with poison gas. The noise is a constant thudding roar that rattles your teeth. The Americans are inexperienced. They die in droves at Belleau Wood and the Argonne Forest. But there are simply too many of them. They are fresh. The Germans are exhausted, starving, and broken after 4 years of war. The arrival of the Americans tips the scale. November 11th, 1918. The guns fall silent. The war to end all wars is over. Woodrow Wilson goes to Paris like a messiah. Crowds throw flowers at his carriage. He has a plan for peace, the 14 points. He wants a League of Nations to prevent this from ever happening again. But the old empires, Britain and France, want revenge. They want to punish Germany. And back home, The American Senate is tired of Europe. They look at the casualties, the cost, and the entanglements, and they say, "No thanks." The Senate rejects the Treaty of Versailles. The U.S. refuses to join the League of Nations. America retreats. It pulls up the drawbridge. It enters the roaring 20s. Jazz, flappers, speakeasies, the stock market climbing to dizzying heights. It is a decade-long party fueled by cheap credit and the belief that the good times will never end. But the hangover is coming. October 1929. The market crashes. The Great Depression hits. The factories go silent. The bread lines stretch around the block. The Dust Bowl turns the Great Plains into a desert. The American dream looks like it's dying. While America is on its knees, monsters are rising overseas. Hitler in Germany, Mussolini in Italy, the militarists in Japan. They see democracy as weak. They begin to conquer their neighbors. The United States stays out of it. Isolationism is the religion of the day. America first is the slogan. Congress passes neutrality acts. We will not sell weapons. We will not lend money. We will not get involved. But President Franklin D. Roosevelt sees the storm coming. He knows you cannot hide from a world war. He starts to nudge the country. He passes Lend-Lease, giving ships and guns to Britain, becoming the arsenal of democracy. December 7th, 1941. A quiet Sunday morning in Hawaii. The radar operators see a blip. They think it's a flight of B-17s coming from the mainland. They ignore it. At 7:48 a.m., the sky over Pearl Harbor fills with the whine of Japanese Zeros. The attack is brilliant, devastating, and a strategic catastrophe for Japan. They sink the battleships. They kill 2,400 Americans. But they miss the oil tanks. They miss the dry docks. And crucially, the American aircraft carriers are out at sea. Admiral Yamamoto, the architect of the attack, reportedly says, "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." He is right. The isolationism evaporates in the smoke of the burning battleships. The United States declares war. Germany declares war on the U.S. The sleeping giant wakes up, and it is angry. The mobilization is total. The car factories stop making cars. They make tanks and bombers. Ford's Willow Run plant produces one B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes. Women flood into the factories, Rosie the Riveter, building the ships that will carry their husbands and brothers to war. Rationing begins. Gas, sugar, meat, rubber. Everyone sacrifices. The war is fought on two massive fronts. In the Pacific, it is a war of islands. Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Iwo Jima. It is a war of savagery. The Japanese refuse to surrender. The Marines have to dig them out of caves with flamethrowers and grenades. It is hot, wet, and intimate violence. The ocean is vast, and the naval battles, Midway, Leyte Gulf, are clashes of titans where ships fire at enemies they cannot see, guided by swarms of aircraft. In Europe, it is a war of liberation. The U.S. and Britain bomber fleets pound German cities into rubble by night and day. June 6, 1944, D-Day, the largest amphibious invasion in history. Imagine you are in a landing craft hitting Omaha Beach. The ramp drops. You're greeted by a wall of machine gun fire. Men are cut in half before they even step off the boat. The water is red. The noise is indescribable. But you push forward, you crawl up the shingle, you take the cliffs, the Allies break out, they race across France, they liberate Paris. But the Germans aren't done. The Battle of the Bulge in the winter of 1944 is a desperate frozen nightmare in the Ardennes forest. But the American industrial machine is too strong. The Germans run out of gas, out of bullets, out of men. April 1945. FDR dies of a cerebral hemorrhage. Harry Truman, a former haberdasher from Missouri who has been vice president for only 82 days, takes the oath. He doesn't even know about the secret weapon the Army is building in the desert of New Mexico. May 1945. Germany surrenders. The Holocaust is revealed. American GIs, hardened by war, walk into camps like Buchenwald and Dachau and weep at the sheer scale of the evil they have uncovered. But the war in the Pacific rages on. The Americans are closing in on Japan. They take Okinawa, but the cost is horrific. Kamikaze pilots hurl their planes into American ships. The generals estimate that an invasion of the Japanese home islands will cost 1 million American casualties. Truman is told about the Manhattan Project, a bomb that harnesses the power of the sun. He faces the hardest decision in history. Drop the bomb and kill immense numbers of civilians, or invade and lose immense numbers of soldiers. August 6, 1945. A B-29 named the Enola Gay drops a single bomb on Hiroshima. A city vanishes in a flash of light. 3 days later, Nagasaki. Japan surrenders. The war is over. The world that emerges from the smoke of 1945 is unrecognizable. Europe is a graveyard. Its cities are rubble, its economies destroyed, its empires bankrupt. Britain is exhausted. France is broken. Germany is partitioned. Japan is occupied. Only 2 powers remain standing. The Soviet Union, which has bludgeoned the German army to death at the cost of 20 million lives, and the United States. But the United States is different. Its homeland has not been touched. Its factories are running at peak capacity. It holds 2/3 of the world's gold reserves. It has the strongest navy, the strongest air force, and the monopoly on the ultimate weapon. The American century has truly begun. The isolationist republic is dead. The global superpower has been born. The soldiers coming home are greeted as heroes, but they are coming home to a new responsibility. They are now the guardians of half the world. And as the ticker tape falls in Times Square, a new chill is already in the air. The alliance with the Soviets was a marriage of convenience. Now the divorce is beginning. The Iron Curtain is descending. The hot war is over. The Cold War is about to begin. The United States has climbed the mountain. It stands at the summit, but the air up there is thin, and the wind is cold, and everyone is watching to see if the giant will stumble. The year is 1946. The smoke has cleared over Europe and Asia, but the sky hasn't brightened. Instead, a twilight settles over the globe. The United States stands alone at the pinnacle of power, holding the atomic fire that can end civilization in a heartbeat. But it is not a lonely summit. Across the ruined plains of Eastern Europe, another giant is stirring: the Soviet Union. The hot war is over. The Cold War has begun. It is a war fought in the shadows, in the whispers of spies in Vienna cafes, in the click of a Geiger counter, and in the terrified silence of a school classroom during a duck-and-cover drill. It is a war of ideology: capitalism versus communism, the free world versus the Iron Curtain. For the average American, life in the 1950s is a strange paradox. On the surface, it is a golden age. The soldiers have returned, discarded their uniforms, and gone to college on the GI Bill. They are buying houses in a new invention called suburbia. Levittown, New York. Rows of identical, neat little houses with green lawns and white fences. The economy is a rocket ship. The factories that build tanks are now churning out Chevrolets, washing machines, and televisions. The interstate highway system, authorized by President Eisenhower, begins to carve the nation into a grid of concrete, allowing a family to drive from New York to Los Angeles on a whim. The American dream is packaged, mass-produced, and sold on the installment plan. But underneath the chrome and the tail fins, there is fear. Deep, vibrating fear. The Soviets have the bomb. The Chinese have fallen to communism. In Washington, Senator Joe McCarthy is hunting for traitors, ruining lives with a pointed finger and a question. Are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? The war turns hot on the fringes. Korea, 1950. American troops are back in the mud fighting a grueling frozen war against North Korean and Chinese waves. It ends in a stalemate, a line drawn on a map that still bristles with guns 70 years later. It is a reminder that nuclear weapons don't guarantee victory. Then, the sky becomes the battlefield. October 4th, 1957, a metal sphere the size of a beach ball, emitting a simple beep, 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 circles the Earth. Sputnik. The Soviets are winning the high ground. Panic grips America. If they can put a satellite over our heads, they can drop a bomb on our cities. President John F. Kennedy, young and charismatic, accepts the challenge. We choose to go to the moon, he says, not because it is easy, but because it is hard. The space race is the ultimate contest of the Cold War. It isn't just about science. It is about proving whose system is better. It is a duel of engineers. And in July 1969, America wins. 3 men strapped to a rocket the size of a skyscraper blast off from Florida. Neil Armstrong steps onto the gray dust of the lunar surface. The world watches on grainy black and white televisions. For a moment, humanity is united in awe, and the American flag is planted in the vacuum of space. But back on Earth, the country is tearing itself apart. The 1960s. The civil rights movement exposes the rot beneath the floorboards of the American mansion. Black Americans, tired of waiting for the freedom promised in 1865, march in Birmingham and Selma. They are met with fire hoses and police dogs, but this time the cameras are rolling. The world sees the hypocrisy of the superpower that preaches freedom abroad while denying it at home. And then there is Vietnam. It starts as a trickle of advisors and ends as a flood of 500,000 conscripts. It is a war fought in a jungle against an enemy who can vanish into the trees. The technological might of the U.S. military, napalm, helicopters, B-52 bombers, is useless against a guerrilla force willing to die for their land. The war comes home. Protesters fill the streets, universities are shut down, the country is more divided than at any time since the Civil War. 1968 is a year of nightmares. Martin Luther King Jr. is assassinated. Robert Kennedy is assassinated. Cities burn. The U.S. withdraws from Vietnam in 1973. 2 years later, helicopters pluck desperate people off the roof of the embassy in Saigon. It is a humiliation. The giant has been humbled. The 1970s are a decade of malaise, oil embargoes, gas lines, inflation, hostages taken in Iran. It feels like the American century is ending before it even really got started. But empires are resilient. The 1980s bring a resurgence. Ronald Reagan promises morning in America. He ramps up military spending, challenging the Soviet Union to an arms race it cannot afford. The Soviet economy, rotting from corruption and inefficiency, begins to buckle. Then, the miracle. 1989. The Berlin Wall, the concrete scar that divided the world, is torn down not by tanks, but by people with hammers and pickaxes. 2 years later, the Soviet Union dissolves. The hammer and sickle flag is lowered from the Kremlin for the last time. The Cold War is over. The United States has won. The 1990s are a victory lap. The economy booms, fueled by a new frontier, the Internet. Silicon Valley becomes the new Detroit, producing code instead of cars. America is the indispensable nation. It polices the world in the Balkans and the Middle East. Its culture, Hollywood movies, rock music, blue jeans, McDonald's, conquers the globe more effectively than any army ever could. This is soft power. You don't have to force people to be American. They want to be. Scholars talk about the end of history. They believe liberal democracy has won, and the future will be a peaceful march toward American-style capitalism. But history doesn't end. It just sleeps. September 11th, 2001. A clear blue morning in New York City. 2 planes slam into the Twin Towers. The symbols of American economic might crumble into dust and twisted steel. 3,000 people die. The illusion of invulnerability, rebuilt after the Cold War, is shattered. The ocean no longer protects the homeland. The sleeping giant wakes up again, but this time it is flailing. The war on terror begins. Invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq, trillions of dollars spent, thousands of lives lost. The moral standing of the nation takes a hit with Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo Bay. The world realizes that American power is vast, but it is not limitless. You can topple a dictator in 3 weeks, but you cannot build a nation in 10 years. Then, the financial crisis of 2008. The banking system, the engine of American dominance, nearly melts down due to greed and recklessness. The global economy teeters. Trust in American leadership is shaken, and now we stand in the present. The landscape has changed again. The United States is no longer the lonely superpower. China has risen, a new economic titan challenging American dominance in trade and technology. Russia is resurgent and aggressive. The world is multipolar, messy and dangerous. But look at what the United States has become. It is a military colossus. It has 800 military bases in 70 countries. Its navy patrols every ocean, ensuring the free flow of trade. Its air force can strike any target on Earth within hours. Its intelligence network listens to the whispers of the world. But its true power lies deeper. It is the center of the global financial system. The dollar is the currency of the world. If you buy oil in Saudi Arabia or copper in Chile, you use dollars. It is the center of innovation. The phone in your pocket, the social media you use, the GPS that guides your car, it all stems from American technology. It is a cultural empire. A kid in Tokyo wears Nikes. A teenager in Berlin listens to Taylor Swift. A family in Rio watches Netflix. The American story is the world story. Yet, the internal contradictions that started in Jamestown are still there. The tension between liberty and order, the struggle for racial equality, the divide between the rural and the urban. The nation is wealthy, but the wealth is concentrated. It is powerful, but it is anxious. Let's look back at the journey. We started with a few starving settlers in a swamp in Virginia, terrified of the dark. We saw them push across the mountains, driven by a hunger for land. We saw them rebel against a king, armed with nothing but muskets and high ideals. We saw them tear themselves apart over the sin of slavery and stitch themselves back together with blood and iron. We saw them conquer a continent, build the greatest industrial machine in history, and save the world from fascism. We saw them reach for the stars and plant a flag on the moon. It is an unlikely story. A country built on an idea. The idea that people can govern themselves, that freedom is a natural right. It is an idea that has been violated, ignored, and betrayed 1,000 times, but it has never been abandoned. The American empire is different from Rome or Britain. It doesn't want to own the land. It wants to own the future. It wants to set the rules. But empires are fragile things. Rome fell. The British Empire faded. The Soviet Union collapsed. History teaches us that no power lasts forever. The trees eventually reclaim the cities. The silence returns. As we stand here today, looking at this sprawling, chaotic, magnificent nation, we have to ask, is this the peak, or is it just another chapter? The settlers at Roanoke disappeared into the mist. The farmers at Concord fired a shot heard round the world. The astronauts looked back at the earth and saw a fragile blue marble. The story of America is the story of human ambition unleashed. It is messy, it is violent, it is inspiring. It is a constant argument between who we are and who we want to be. The map is full now. There are no more blank spaces. The frontier is no longer a line on the prairie. It is the microchip, the gene, the climate, the stars. The challenges ahead are not redcoats or kings, but the limits of our own wisdom. We have risen from the colonies to world power. We have built a colossus. But as Benjamin Franklin said on that hot day in Philadelphia, we have a republic, if we can keep it. The lights of the cities glow against the night sky, brighter than the stars that guided the first ships across the Atlantic. The highway hums with the sound of 1,000,000 journeys. The server farms blink in the dark, storing the memories of a digital age. The silence of the pre-colonial forest is gone forever. But in the quiet moments, if you listen closely, you can still hear the echo of that first question asked by a shivering settler looking at a wall of trees. Can we make it here? The answer for 400 years has been yes, but history is a long book, and we are still writing the next page. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the rise of America. It's a story that belongs to everyone, in all its glory and all its scars. Sleep well, and remember, the past is never really gone. It's just waiting for you to notice it. Good night.